Okay, welcome back. We are into the final week, and I'm joined again by Carlo, and we're going to talk about the final, really, and give a bit of a roundup of Fire and Blood while we're here. So, first of all, Carlo, Fire and Blood for you as a TO, how did that go?
Easy. Everyone's so familiar and comfortable with Fire and Blood that the only question that came up was around the skin changes and how they interact. We ruled that a unit of bears does give up those additional VPs, so which I guess is similar to the way Insignificant works. I have been told through some whispered back channels, some little birds, somebody told me that somebody from Simon told them that that is the way it works. But that's not an official ruling. That is just somebody asked somebody they knew and they said, yes, that's correct.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Obviously, we'll have to wait and see where the correct ruling is, FAQs, things like that come out. Um, it's a pretty minor thing, but I think it's a big. Like if they never give up VPs, then bear spam in Fire and Blood from Free Folk might be the thing that saves their win rate in that
Yeah.
particular game mode, which we'll obviously talk about in a minute. Um, in terms of stat stuff, there wasn't a huge amount change from last week, right? We still see Varus and Walder from NCU's perspective still posting that 70% win rate or close to 70% win rate over ridiculous numbers of games. We are talking now something silly like 53 games for Varus and 31 games for Walder in total.
That's statistical significance right there.
Yeah.
It's one set of data. You'd like to see it repeated over time, but for this set of data, that's enough results to say that this isn't random chance. Players are being paired against other players that the tournament thinks are of a similar rating, a similar ability to them. People who are winning are coming together, people who are losing are coming together, and those that run these NCUs are then winning that match, which should be two relatively equally rated players,
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else makes you win the match.
Yeah. Another one we've talked about before is obviously activations as well, and activations continue to remain high as well. Just to get the exact figures up there, um, you know, if you breach that kind of like two activation advantage over your opponent, your win rate scales astronomically, close to 70%. Now, Fire and Blood, interestingly, is one of the few game modes which has seen that win rate drop a little bit, but we are only talking about dropping it to like 66%. It's not a significant drop from that 70 that we were at before. Um,
Mm.
so it still very strongly indicates that you're hitting two more activations than your opponent. The chances are you'll be beating them. Um, that though does bring us quite nicely on to talk about activation advantage. The different win rates of factions within Fire and Blood itself in relation to kind of where the factions sat overall. So to give you an idea, before we came into this round, most factions were posting about 50% win rate. Free Folk were just below that at about 45%, and then Targaryens 12%, something awful like that, 14%. We don't talk about Targaryens. Now, interestingly, this round we saw Starks, of the 15 games in which they appeared that weren't mirrors, they won 12 of them. That's huge. Like that's a massive percentage win rate. That's 80% win rate. Lannisters on the flip side won one of their five, so that's a 20%. Night's Watch was a very prominent one, 75% win rate over 8 games. Free Folk did not win a single game of the 5 that they appeared in. Baratheons were posting a 33% win rate, atrocious, and then Targs and Neutrals, the data's too small really to really consider, with only 2 or 3 games played between them. So Starks at an astronomical 80% win rate for Fire and Blood, and Night's Watch at a 75% win rate. Carlo, what are your thoughts on those two specifically?
Night's Watch makes a lot of sense because they are a faction that generally put their identity into like a 4 combat unit kind of position, they should be firing. They should be great at Fire and Blood. They should be able to put 4 units down, none of which you want to mark, and that should just be part of the way that at least one of your lists is built.
Yeah.
And that's fine for me. I don't have anything to say on whether or not that's an issue. Starks, on the other hand, historically, from what we've had submitted to A Song of Ice and Fire stats, Starks have always actually done badly in Fire and Blood, and I never particularly understood it because they do have a very strong build into Fire and Blood, which is to also place something around 4 strong combat units onto the table, but also pad out activations with the dogs, which can't be marked. I don't believe that it is like a truly historical problem because we're talking about only submissions from 1.5.1 onwards. So we're not talking about the days back when you could mark the dogs, when they used to interact differently.
Mm-hmm.
So even for the first couple of months of the site, Starks were not their game mode that let them down was Fire and Blood, and I never understood why. Because there are very strong ways to build Starks into Fire and Blood. 75, no, sorry, 80% win ratio though in a tournament where players are playing against other equally skilled opponents in late rounds when things are close and people are playing for absolutely everything they can. They're trying to win and get the top 4. 80% is huge. It's too high over such a significant amount of results.
Yeah, I mean, by far it was
Um,
the largest number of games played at 15 of in the round that weren't mirrors, of course. So all of this data excludes mirrors now. 15 games played and 12 wins, like that. That is 80% of statistical relevance, I think.
yeah,
Um,
that's enough game modes, enough matchups that you're thinking that's a problem. Like, how can you expect to enter a tournament where we've always seen Starks be a third to even higher of all the entrants in a tournament? If
yeah.
that tournament runs Fire and Blood and you get drawn against Starks, you're thinking, well, I've lost the game. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but I get drawn against a player like Ariakas playing Starks.
Hmm.
I've watched Ariakas play through the past 3 rounds, and he has basically not made a single mistake. He is a very good player who is well prepared for the game. Now, if I come into this game basically at a disadvantage because of the game mode and the units that he's picked and the army list that he can build, and he doesn't make a mistake, then that's it. I can't win. Like, if I can't force him to make a mistake, I
Hmm.
cannot win the game.
Yeah.
Yes, everybody can always win and always lose, but this is currently looks like it starts to throw away, not each player's position to win the game.
Yeah, I mean, I've brought up the Free Folk page interestingly, because I think this marries up with another statistic that we've actually had on the stat site for a while now, which is a win rate of 80% for Clash of Kings with Free Folk on Clash of Kings. 80% win rate is obscene, and a lot of people have said, and I will sit here as a Free Folk player and say I shouldn't be losing Clash of Kings against most players. Um, Certainly not since I've become halfway decent. Not since the Heroes box release has this been true. I think before that maybe there was days I would have lost, but that is kind of expected. With factions not really being considered true factions until the Hero box. Um, the 80% win rate that we see then from Free Folk and Clash of Kings is now being slowly. I mean, yes, this is only a small selection, a small subset of games from the Starks perspective, at only 15. But if they're posting that 80% win rate and they continue to post that level of win rate in competitive games that we see going forward, they're going to drag their relatively low win rate up. And even if it sits at 70% because of those historical games, that's still an issue, right? That's still a
Yep.
potential problem.
Anything significantly like I'd use 60 to 40, like I can't expect them to do much better than that across everything, across the board.
Mhm.
Really, you'd like it to be 55 to 45. That's really what you'd call balance. Outside of that 60-40, every percentage is starting to look like a problem. When we're talking about, Starks are also the most popular faction. We're talking
Oh yeah.
about they have over 600 submissions now for Starks alone. If you can post certain game modes above a 60% win ratio, then it's a problem for everybody else because how are they supposed to enter a tournament and have a realistic chance of winning when you're so likely to meet a Stark and they're going to have a big advantage on you in that game mode? You're not saying who's the better player here. You're just saying, can I get lucky and meet a bad Stark player to get a win here?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that is the case. I mean, obviously, player skill, the gulf between player skills will always be the biggest decider of any game. We'll actively say that. But as you say, if you're coming across someone at roughly similar skill level, it's going to be very hard, minus mistakes. Ultimately, it comes down to mistakes, really, doesn't it?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Yeah, I
and
mean, I still believe at every level, you know, it's a big discussion about like what's balanced, what's not,
mhm,
what's acceptable, what's not. I still believe, and it's just off the top of my head. I use it. I use it. It's a number that I coined, and what I think is I still believe 90% of games are determined by somebody making a mistake. Forgetting that their unit is marked and has plus two attacks. Forgetting that they had a trigger that they could have used.
yeah,
Forgetting to activate one of their units. Jesus, lucky. you know,
yeah,
these things still, even at a very high level, account for about 90% of all losses, in my opinion.
yeah,
Somebody will make a mistake. And to be honest, you're mostly trading multiple mistakes, and it's who makes the least. But once you remove them all, once you get rid of them, or more importantly, once you draw in enough data so that you can basically say across the balance of everything, we're not looking at who made the mistakes, we're looking at what faction is the best here.
yeah,
When you're left with that kind of information, bang, you have problems if your win rates are outside of that bracket.
yeah. So that's a comment on Starks, really, and it does, as we say, it does marry up with the idea that the Night's Watch data, I should say, does marry up with the idea that Night's Watch are an elite faction. I think that having them as that elite faction would make sense that their win rate in Fire and Blood is as high, and that's to some extent more reasonable. I would still say it's perhaps a little bit too high if we were looking at true balance, but it's more reasonable given that Night's Watch across the board have struggled in other game modes.
True, it's also a smaller amount of data.
Yes.
Theirs isn't so significant at only 8 games played. It could be if one of those games goes the other way, it's a 5 out of 8, and that
Yeah.
looks like a far more acceptable win rate at like 57% off the top of my head or something like
Yeah.
that. Oh, actually, it might be 62. But at 62, you're thinking, oh, that's not an issue. So 8, we're not at any kind of significance yet, but you have twice as many results for the Starks. You got 15 results
Yeah.
that aren't including mirrors. You're, you know, I think you're route 2 more significant with
Mhm.
twice as many results, and your win rate's even higher.
Yeah. Definitely.
And you have no reason to say why this one's supposed to be your good game mode.
And I think it comes back down to something we've talked about before, and that's the activation advantage. They are one of
Yeah,
the few factions that can sustain activation advantage while also running elite troops.
yeah.
So you combine the two together, and they have the army of equivalent to what Night's Watch are running, but with extra activations because they can just field wolves. Um, okay, so that's kind of Starks. On the flip side, um, Lannisters 20%, Free Folk 0% win rate on Fire and Blood. I know these are small; they're only 5 games each for Lannisters and Free Folk, and even Baratheons at 33% win rate over 12 games. That's 4 wins, 8 defeats. We saw Stannis obviously beat Furioku in table 1 of the of that round, and quite an interesting game to watch. But win rates of that low, 33%. not great. 20% is awful. Again, very small number of games though, and 0% win rate for Free Folk. Oh, what?
What's difficult here is I've just written an article about why up until this point Baratheon's best game mode has statistically been Fire and Blood. That's
Yep.
what they're supposed to be good at. That's what they play into well. They play into out of activation attacks, um, doubling down on a unit being very hard to kill. All these things play so well into a Renly based loyalty and Baratheons in general that they used to post about a 70% win ratio. It was getting to the point where it was dangerously high for Baratheons, but they didn't have that many submissions yet. And it was also tempered by the fact that it's okay a little bit because that's their best game mode and it's significantly better than all other game modes. And yet they've now just come in and they've had the floor wiped from them by the Starks. They've been absolutely abused left, right, and center. And so have Lannisters, and so have the Free Folk. Free Folk have always been bad in Fire and Blood, and
Yep.
it's obvious why because they have so many targets that are just easy marking bait in Fire and Blood,
Yeah.
and they don't really have any way to keep their units on the board.
Mhm.
So they are going to give up VPs.
Um, I was just looking at the data there for the actual round. It interestingly, pretty much across the board, every faction lost to Starks. Every faction lost to Starks, which you'd expect with the Starks high posting. And if they weren't losing to Starks, the next list they were losing to was Night's Watch. There were actually very few games between a faction that wasn't Night's Watch or Stark and somebody else. And if it was probably going to be the Baratheons, which is where they picked up their wins. So if Baratheons were playing against Night's Watch, they lose. The Baratheons play against Starks, they lose. Baratheons play against anybody else, they win. But it comes back to that Stark problem. Starks were just dominant across the board of everybody. The only people to beat Starks were Night's Watch, surprise, surprise, and one Lannister player. So,
Good on him.
yeah, I mean, well done for him. But, we talk about Free Folk and the abysmal win rates that they've got, and even Baratheon, and, game mode that they should be statistically strong on. But they are being solidly beaten by Night's Watch, which is somewhat fair. That's kind of what they want to do, and they've got the high maneuverability to kind of make the Baratheons suffer with the good range attacks. But it Starks again. It Starks again.
I have to say, I have to say, I'm going to put my hands up and say, I used to harp on about the Free Folk and Clash of Kings and say that that's our issue.
Hmm.
And other people used to say, no, look, it's Starks. Why are Starks so? Why are Starks not the top ranked faction on the site? Like your stats must be wrong. And I said, well, no, they're not wrong. For a start, they're not wrong. I only work with the submissions that I have.
Yeah.
But I will start to change my tune. I say that, and I've always said that from the submissions that I've seen and the games that I've seen in real life. And I would say that in the meta in both my local area and the UK as a whole, because I have been up and down the country playing competitions,
Yeah.
I've never seen it be dominated in the UK by this high activation spam of the Starks. I think that it's come from, basically it's come from Eastern Europe, or mainland Europe as a whole, but we're talking, or Central Europe. I think that it might be that they're basically a step ahead in the game, and I do think they are if you look at their average finishing positions. That they're playing a slightly more advanced meta, a slightly more experienced meta, in which it is already dominated by this Stark activation spam, and I had never seen people running the Stormcrow mercenaries with the Stark attachments just to bring down their points cost. And I'd never seen these 10 activation lists being run with success in tournaments.
No.
We were playing in a 7, 8, and 9 activation meta in the UK. I think even the free folk were happy to sit at like 9 activations and be the people with the highest activation count there. The Starks would sit on an 8 or a 9, and everybody else would sit on 7 or 8. But what we've seen here in this tournament is that Starks have decided they're actually a 9 or a 10 activation faction. The free folk struggle to be that 9 and 10. They're actually sitting basically solidly at 9.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody else is still at that 7 and 8. You can't get past it with most other factions. You massively compromise on having any useful abilities, any control over what you're putting on the table other than just the cheapest thing you can buy to get past that 8. And we're seeing that 2 activation advantage just dominating most games. And I'll finally say, I think Starks are an issue, and I specifically think that Direwolves are an issue in the way that they're run at the moment. And the stats are starting to represent it. Right now, outside of what you own and what you want to play, there is no real statistical reason why you should ever pick anything other than Starks. I can't give you one.
Yeah, and there's bound always to be. I mean, balancing everything like this, there's always bound to be one faction that stands out and is strongest. You could say that about anything, but then you'd argue that there are builds and methods that you could run lists that prove very strong. I mean, look at Stannis 1000th Lord Commander in the tournament. He has time and time again proven that Baratheons are good.
Yes.
But that being said, like when you see the win rates that we see, and I think one comment really summed it up for me. Varys has a 70% win rate, and someone said on the forum today, I take Varys because he's really good at countering sudden charge.
Exactly.
He took something with a 70% win rate because he knew he was having to play against Starks. That was it.
Same with Walder. Walder is picked because he puts pressure on dogs. We got one of our predictions wrong last round.
We did.
That's because I'm still learning and understanding this new meta, and I don't understand the Stark mirror as a non-Stark player, and I don't understand what the really key important parts are, which is that Larks and Ariakas both understood that the most important things they could possibly do was pick Howland for Bog Devil Ambush and to have their list which has Walder Freying. And now when you look at their pair of lists, you see and you understand that they both have built a list which is entirely dedicated to fighting against other Starks.
Yep.
They have built this list to spam activations so that they can't possibly lose the activation count against Starks, and they have all the possible tools to kill off other Starks. So now I don't care what game mode it is. If I'm playing against the Stark, I'm taking this list. And they both were good enough to understand that, to not make a mistake in that phase of the game, even though me and Mickey sat here and predicted that the game mode would favor their other list. And against any other faction other than Starks, their other list would be their better choice. I will maintain. I mean, like, again, might be showing my not knowledge of Starks. One of them might pipe up and say, oh, actually, I would always have taken Howland in this game mode. But this is a on-field commander favored scenario, and it favors those 4 combat units. So they both have very strong lists for it against anybody but Starks, and they both chose to play Howland. And once you understand that, I see why the match went the other way. But to be honest, they were playing very, very similar lists, so it could even have been considered a coin flip. I mean, it wasn't. It was expertly played. I'll not take anything away from that. It was expertly played by Ariakas. So much preparation. He completely understood what was important. He understood his advantages. He knew that they were both going to play Howland, and that his advantage there was the fact that he had the ranged unit, and that what he wanted to do was maintain distance. And all these things tell me that Ariakas will not make anywhere near significant enough mistakes that he could possibly lose Game of Thrones to Stannis running his Baratheons, because he comes into this one not on an equal footing with Larks. He comes into this, in my mind, with a big advantage in his favor, which is the Baratheons have to choose between being slow and tanky, not great for the fact that they need to go out there and cover ground, or be medium speed and incredibly fragile but aggressive while being out activated in every case.
Yep. Um, you know, I could sit here and we could talk about the real matchup in terms of like which ones we'd expect him to play, which ones we think he'd be good at, which how the matchups work in general. But I'm almost certain that Ariakas will play his Howland list. It would make sense. It's 10 activations, um, and that leaves Stannis choosing between Axel and Renly. And if he wants to put pressure on the dogs, he probably needs to play Axel. You know, if he can get the dogs
He
killed, you know,
sorry, no. That doesn't work. You're the wrong Axel.
yeah, you don't have Roosty.
You're not the Axel that kills
You're
dogs.
not even the
That's
Axel that
your
kills dogs.
unfortunate problem. He still has to play,
His
in
Walder
my
list.
opinion, he still has to play his Stannis based list
He's,
because Melisandre is the only thing that will allow him to apply pressure. Otherwise, he's going to walk forward with his Rose Knights, and by the time he gets there, he will have already lost the game.
yeah,
In my opinion, you know, I think that I think that if he wanted to play this specific game mode for a start, so the problem with Game of Thrones for Baratheons, and it's really not a good game mode for them, is that it's a 6-inch deployment zone.
yeah,
So you've got a whole extra 6 inches that you need to walk up the table. And the reason why they've always done well in Fire and Blood is because 18-inch deployment. So that takes, yes, you're slow. Yes, four movement is worse than 5 movement and a lot worse than 6. But if you can begin the game already in the center of the table, it matters less than if you begin on your own table edge and you have to march every turn towards the center of the board and you don't get there until after you've activated second turn.
yeah,
Whereas the Starks, with their cavalry, with whatever they're using, all these options, they can be on the center of the board waiting for you by the time you arrive there. And then if you choose to engage, they can retreat. And if you choose not to engage, they can hold you off and then activate late in the round.
yep,
Really, it makes you incredibly predictable because you have to march every turn if you want to get to the middle. So wherever you start the game pointing at is where you're going to end up. You know, you can't do anything exciting there. And I think his only choice is to play Melisandre and just start scaring the Lannisters, scaring the Starks into possibly making a mistake because they're still at an advantage. But if you can throw out a panic that does 6-7 wounds on the first turn, you might panic your opponent into a mistake. You might, even though he has good morale, above
yeah.
average, all these things, still think that,
It feels,
it's an uphill battle.
yeah. I mean, it feels like a little bit of a reach, to be honest. Um, and not that I don't think Stannis is a, you know, I still think we're going to see a very good game. I still think Stannis, if anybody in the tournament can try and combat a Stark list with Baratheons, um, you know, we've seen Stannis do it, and we might see him do it again. Um, but you're right, this game mode really does not favour him in any way, shape, or form. And Ariakas is a superb Stark player, as we've seen. Even if he plays even remotely close to his performances that we've seen him in other games where he's been very dominant, to be honest, it's not been. He's taken the game and confirmed a victory rather than just playing a narrow win. You know, he has stranglehold his opponent in both games very well. If we see that again, I just do not see how Stannis can realistically make this game any different to another Stark win.
Yeah. The players that Ariakas has gone on and beaten, they've bounced back and continued to win the rest of their games. They're sitting there with only losses to Ariakas. Not entirely, but like off the top of my head, the Stark players that he's come through are also up in the top 10, still trying to make second in the tournament, behind Ariakas, who has played the last few rounds where I've watched his games closely pretty flawlessly. Interestingly, I actually think that he will play Eddard under the assumption that Stannis will play his Axel Florent list.
Hmm.
His Eddard list, Eddard himself provides a nice bit of healing. He's got Tycho, which counters a Melisandre bomb.
Yeah.
So he can intercede in the timing between Melisandre doing high damage at the end of one round and high damage at the start of the next round, allowing you to heal and make sure that that's a guaranteed not kill. He doesn't have Varys in either list, so that's not really an issue. And I don't think that Walder has a huge role to play. On top of that, there is the Stormcrow Mercs with Rickon, who are obviously a very obvious Melisandre target, but the Berserkers and the Tully Cavaliers with their Embolden really start to marginalize Melisandre's value and put a bit of risk onto Stannis's part when he takes those 3 wounds and makes you take that test. If he takes those 3 wounds, makes you take a test, and you've passed it, then God, it's bad news. Like, you spent 5 points in an NCU that's just killing your own stuff now.
Yeah. And these units are going to come across the board. The Berserkers and the Tully Cavaliers are going to come across the board rapidly at you.
Fast.
You know, the only real weakness I would say in that list that maybe Stannis could leverage, it is only a 9 activation list. So Stannis' Axel list is 8. So he's only 1 advantage behind, which actually statistically is not a huge advantage in favour of the
Like
person with greater.
55 to 45 in
Yeah.
advantage of the 1 activation, as
Yeah.
opposed to 65 to 70-ish percent for the 2+ activations.
Yeah. So I mean, if you just take that statistic, he'd be dropping his win rate by at least 10-15% by taking the Eddard list. But you've also got to consider that the Great Axes with Eddard in are very slow as well. So there's an opportunity to leverage that a little bit. But even
But
then,
they would butcher Rose Knights if he ever did take Rose Knights.
oh god, yeah.
They play brilliantly into all. They're the only thing that a Baratheon player would be scared of to begin the round engaged with, because beginning round engaged is Baratheon's best trigger effect.
Hmm.
Whereas what I think is if Stannis takes Renly, as he has often in the event, more often than I would predict he would, and often I think, oh, if he takes Renly here, his activations are low and he's going to get outmaneuvered. I'm going to say it again. He takes Renly, he gets outmaneuvered. And I say that with absolute certainty because Ariakas has shown incredible positioning and incredible patience in when he decides to take you apart.
Yes.
He will not make the mistakes that other people have. He will not attack Rose Knights unless he has to. He will not do it until he can do it with overwhelming force. And he will destroy those bastard girls before they get to do anything and be out the other side and in the flanks and rear of the Rose Knights. And once you're in the flanks and rears of them, actually, probably just ignore them. I'm not even talking about attacking them. You just stand in their rear and make them turn to face you and then just walk off again. Because
Yep.
that's the kind of outmaneuvering that he will be able to do with the kind of activation advantage and speed advantage that he has. Those things tell me the only way Stannis can provide and apply pressure is to pick the Axel Florent list. And
It just still doesn't stack up great.
it's still a list that's not in favor of you. If it was a Roos list with Axel Florent NCU 3 points, you could apply significantly more pressure to the dogs. You can almost guarantee, actually, against either of Ariakas's lists, you could flat out guarantee that you will kill a dog every turn with Axel, because Roos going to provide those tokens that even if you remove it with money bags. So I take letters, put down a token. You take it away with money bags. I put another token with Roos. You cannot pass the activation with that dog. I have Axel Florent on you. You are dead. No 2 ways around it.
Yeah.
If you don't run Caitlyn Stark, I can do that. If you do run Caitlyn, you have another way to take that new token off, and
Yep.
you've got yourself a save. But Ariakas doesn't have them. But you have to understand what an incredible investment that is. Roos, none of his cards synergize with the rest of the list at all. You're going to replace that zone effect every single turn for those 2 panic tokens, giving it up. You give up. Axel Florent in himself as an NCU commander has wonderful cards and wonderful synergies. So I like his list into everything other than Starks, and possibly into everything other than Game of Thrones, because Game of Thrones is already just a problem for you. And guess what? You got Game of Thrones and you got Starks.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, but barring a miracle, you've lost.
Yeah, I think that's a fairly good place to kind of really round that one up, really. Interestingly, I actually think that Davos, as a commander who we've not seen picked at all in this tournament, I actually think Davos commander for Stannis' side, dropping Melisandre, and taking cheaper NCUs, dropping one of the Law Faithful and taking cheaper NCUs where you can. I actually think that is a better answer to Starks and Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Um,
Stark
the
specifically.
Yeah, start specifically,
Stark
but it has a
specifically. Melisandre
completely
has only medium value against the Starks
yeah.
because at 6 morale base across the board with spikes of better, you're struggling to find great value out of her.
I actually think. I mean, people talk about the power level of Melisandre and certainly the negative play experience, but I genuinely think that in lists where Melisandre is usually good, the Rose Knight side, Renly side, are just as effective, if not more effective. And the only real reason to run Mel is these anti-dog lists or anti-bad morale lists, in which case you might as well just take high maneuverability, get your good units stuck in, and rinse them that way. I I think there's value in taking Mel, but I really think that as an auto include as a 5-point NCU, I really think that actually you should be thinking twice about including her, rather than just saying yes, she's in.
In this activation spam, dog spam, Stark meta, the
Yep.
golden piece is Axel Florent,
Yep.
NCU, 3 points, not NCU commander. The pressure it will allow you to apply to Starks is brilliant. And I think that if you don't have it, you're overlooking how often you will have to play into Starks.
I mean, he basically works the same as Walder, but he's 2 points less, effectively. Okay then, so we are rounding up there, I guess, with Ariakas to take the game. So Ariakas to win. Do you think it's going to be crushing, or do you think it's going to be standard, or do you think it's going to be narrow, or do you even think it's going to be a draw? No, it can't be a draw. We'll just keep playing till round 7. No.
Yeah,
I'm tempted to say crushing, to be
it's a
honest.
crushing victory. I think it's a crushing victory. You know, until Ariakas makes a big blunder, it's a crushing victory. And I haven't seen him make one yet.
Yep. So that kind of ends our discussion there for table 1. There are obviously a load of other players vying out for the second position, so I'm just going to go through the players who got a chance. We've got So Cisgender is up there with his Lannisters, the only Lannister representative in the top 10. Brett Lanfer with his Starks, strong player as we know, only lost to Ariakas, is that right? Or did he lose to Lark?
No, he lost to Bob Bernard.
He lost to Bob Bernard, that was right, who went on to
Yep.
lose to Ariakas, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah.
Lark's up there, who unfortunately lost to Ariakas in effectively the semis, but he's still up there in contention for second. Morpheus Com with his Starks, relatively unheard of name in the top tables because he got knocked out, I think, in the 3rd round, I think. Or it might have even been the 2nd, but he's been constantly as an underlying threat coming up. Interesting running. Dario, big shout out to Dario Naharis coming up the table. Hajmon with his Starks, Roderick Robb, so another good player. Furioku is the free folk player after that defeat to Stannis, so we'll see how he gets on. Furioku's teammate, Sizemash, also from Proof Gaming, with his Night's Watch, the only Night's Watch, again in the top, and Orgebill with his neutrals, again the only neutral player. And then rounding it off of likely candidates that can still win, De Border and Frerin, both Starks. So as you can see there, we've got Baratheon, Stark, Lannister, Stark, Free Folk, Night's Watch, Neutral, Stark. No Targs.
7 of the top 12, i.e., all the people with 1 or less losses, are Starks right now. Interestingly, you've got 1 of everybody else, except Targaryens. Everybody else can be run competitively. Everybody else can compete.
Yep.
It's not to say that Starks play a game and necessarily win, because player skill is still so important in this game, and that's why I love it. Player skill and preparation are still so important, but I think that Starks are coming into nearly every matchup as the favorites against anybody but Starks, and it's always their game to lose. And we're seeing only players who have managed to force their opponents to lose, who have outplayed their opponents, still up there with other factions. And you can do that with anybody. I actually even think you can do it with Targaryens. I just think it's hardest.
Well, I think the way to doing it with Targaryens is actually is unlike Mystery Knight's neutral combos that he uses with them. I think it's Deoxys 2500 runs Jorah, and although people really don't think Jorah's strong, and I will freely admit that I think Jorah needs something to make him relevant, even just running him about the back of the board as a 3-point unit choice, where you basically waste the activations just like you do with dogs, actually it makes the Targaryens competitively viable. And I never thought I would say that Jorah, by not even using him, makes the Targaryens more viable. And I think that really is a perfect way to kind of sum the meta and sum the tournament up, really. In that I still think it's great, don't get me wrong, but activations
But the
have
unit
been
that
the
everybody
dominance.
hates, the unit that everybody thinks is overcosted, couldn't possibly be worth 3 points, is worth 3 points, because buying an activation for 3 points is more important than anything else right now.
Yep.
I don't care what else you could have bought with that 3 points. You need that activation.
Yep.
It's just sad that Stark's got a better one than you for 2.
Well,
and an attachment.
for one.
God, Summer really. Whew. Summer really gives it to Jorah. Like, he better run for his life against Summer.
Yeah.
He has not got a chance.
We'll leave it there, guys, for this week. But thanks a lot for participating in these sessions and coming down and seeing me and Carlo talk about the stats and everything else. A big shout out again to all the sponsors. Carlo, I'll let you do them this week.
Oh God, no! You put me under pressure now. Yeah,
Haha.
Mythicos. Oh, you know what? You know what I'll talk about today. Forget the sponsors. The guild is just about to get announced. Practically all the sponsors are part of the guild, plus more people. A Song of Ice and Fire guild. It's been a big collaboration project, and it's hopefully just going to produce some really brilliant content and a place for you to go and find everything that you need to know. Find all your favorite content creators, and I'm really pleased that Song of Ice and Fire Stats is part of that.
Mhm.
I guess something that we haven't actually even really talked about is that the NRG TTS League is in some way basically the first official guild-based tournament, and the guild will be running more tournaments in the future through the site, looking to host a whole big tournament series, and we will look to be crowning what are a Song of Ice and Fire guild tournament winners, and really enshrining them on the site as the people who have shown themselves the best in the world at any given time. And I think between Stannis and Ariakas, to be honest, if Stannis takes it, I will literally say that Stannis is the best player in the world right now, because I don't see how he wins that game. And if not, I'll say that Ariakas has played absolutely flawlessly and definitely deserves to be the tournament winner. And I say that whoever wins it, whoever takes it, is best player right now in the world for me. And that's because I don't think a tournament yet so far has seen this level of competitive play, this level of people preparing for the match, this level of homework, and this level of high quality, really. I don't think anything's been this high quality before.
Hmm.
Maybe there are some people out there who think that they're better, but until you prove it, then until you go out there and beat Ariakas in a fully competitive event, sorry, or possibly Stannis. Could go that way. It
To be
could go
honest,
that way.
I think at this
Go
point,
that way.
I think you should have to beat Stannis and Ariakas. You know,
Exactly. Exactly.
across a myriad of games, different, potentially any different game mode, because these two
Yeah.
players, and it's not just these two. There are other players up there. I'll say them again: So Cisgender, Brett Lanfer, Larks, Morpheuscom, Hajmon, Furioku, Sizemash, Orgebil, Deborda, Frerin. They're all players up there who are saying, "Look, I can compete on an international level, and I can prove that I deserve to be one of the well, they're the 12 best players at the moment that we know
Yep.
of internationally." And there are
Yeah.
players who haven't entered, and we say the same thing again to them. You got to prove that you deserve to be there by entering
Yeah.
tournaments.
Exactly. Exactly. History means nothing. The meta is changing all the time, and if you're not developing with it and proving at any given time that you're brilliant, then you're yesterday's news.
Yep.
So get involved. Show next time that you are the best. Get on to the next tournament, because I've been surprised at how much attention the tournament has had. And I think that the amount of streaming we've had and the amount of people interested in the results has really shown that TTS can be a brilliant output for it, and it can be a brilliant test for who is the best, not who is the best within driving distance of this event.
Yes. Okay, guys. Thank you very much for joining me and Carlo again. We will see you again. We'll come back with more chat, more predictions. Maybe we'll look at Assault on Whiterun and see if we want to do maybe it's a short series of that, taking our hot takes away from it. But thanks a lot for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you at the big event on Sunday. We'll be announcing winners and seeing all the things and this, that, and the other. But until then, take it easy.